Welcome back to CES in Las Vegas. My name is Jared Kelly. Again, joining me here is Dave Lashmitt, editor of Stansberry Venture Technology, and Christian Olson, editor of Stansberry's Innovation Report. And of course, I have Brett Aiken here, our editor-in-chief. Really, CES is an important event. When you think about the largest companies in the world, you're thinking about companies like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook. I mean, these are all technology companies. I mean, technology is massive in terms of investment potential, and you look at some of the companies over the past, 10, 20 years, the most successful companies for investors have been companies like Amazon, Netflix, Google, large tech companies. So it's really great to see this. Dave, I'll start with you. Over breakfast, you were telling me this morning that, which I thought was really interesting, that CES is a really neat thing. It's not going to have a lot of concepts that are going to be breaking out here. It's a lot of hands-on technology that's going to hit the market this year.
Yeah, the key audience for this particular show is actually the buyer who's buying for Best Buy to have what's in the showroom for Christmas. So what we're seeing mostly is polished technology, which is a product. It's technology meets economics, which is really good for us and for investors.
So, Brett, I want to turn it to you. Now, obviously, we've seen a lot of big companies here, but there's also been a lot of smaller companies, thousands of smaller companies that are represented here. Did you see any that in particular that you're excited about?
Yeah, I don't want to get into too much of the details because we've got a lot of research to dig deeper on these companies. But we've spoken about this before. The idea of CES is really conceptual. So a lot of the things that we've seen, like you've mentioned, there's a car in front of us here, and we saw this car 2 or 3 years ago, and it's all about self-driving motor vehicles, and we know there's some limitations and a lot of liability issues to get through before it can actually be a reality here in the United States. It is starting to make progress in other countries, but that was a case where Dave, in fact, found the company that was really driving that technology, which was NVIDIA. And so we're looking for those companies.
Which, by the way, NVIDIA's household name today. 5 years ago, not as many people knew it.
Exactly. I think when Dave recommended the stock, it was probably trading around $40, $45. I'm not sure where it sits today, but I know Dave's readers that got into that stock probably made about 400 or 500%. So that was a case where nobody really knew that technology, but conceptually, everybody was talking about autonomous driving and driverless cars. So, I sat in a car today, and they were calling it a pod, and it was actually autonomous. There was a guy sitting in there in case something went a little wrong, but we were driving around at 15 miles an hour, so it's not exactly lightning speed. But what this company's doing is, and they already have operations in Australia, and they're targeting the rideshare business, so the Ubers, the Lyft type companies, and I can see where you're going to have environments like, Christian, I spoke earlier of the car parks in Disney World, or the huge car parks in an airport where you park your car, but you've still got like a taxi drive to get to the terminal. So these things will be floating around, and you'll hop in, and like in my case, I said, "Hi Watson, take me to New York," and they had a destination in the parking lot was called New York. And you could ask questions along the way, like how's the weather in London, how's the weather in New York. So it's a combination of companies that have combined their technology to get this across the line, so to speak. And it's a product it's already rolled out in Adelaide in Australia, they're rolling out in Berlin, they're aiming to roll out in New York and Chicago here in the United States. I'm not sure of the time frames on that, but there's so many technologies going into that vehicle, like NVIDIA has gone into the Audis of the world. We're looking for those other NVIDIAs, and we've seen plenty of companies that we think will find those companies to grow into, become the next NVIDIA.
Yeah, so obviously you spent a lot of time today talking about car technology. Driverless cars is just part of that. A lot of safety and consumer comfort. I know, Dave, you were not as excited about the cars as you were about something else.
Yeah, we're really looking for next generation video game stuff, things that'll roll out starting in 3 months or starting in 6 months. So we saw the last of the best that Sony had for PlayStation 4, but we know that means they're at the cusp of PlayStation 5, which will be 100 million units at about $500 a piece. So there's a huge demand for a video game system that can play on a 4K TV.
And that's what you think is the big thing to come out of this show?
I think so. I mean, it's not quite here, but we're seeing the technical tools that if you put them together, you'd have next generation gaming.
So we also saw a lot of robots today, a lot of AI. Christian, anything in particular that you saw that was really exciting today?
Yeah, I actually had a really good opportunity to see some of these robots in action. Spoke with one of the engineers who indicated that the robots that we're seeing today are twice as fast as last year. Twice as fast, twice as sensitive, everything is doubled, which is fantastic and has a lot of ramifications for a lot of different industries. In particular, I'm also looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as IoT in that space and in the ag space. So I looked at John Deere today to see what some of their products are that they're using those technologies in their hardware, and there's some pretty exciting stuff coming.
Yeah, I mean, it affects all aspects of life. I mean, John Deere, is farming. You can't get much more, I don't know, technically ambivalent than that, right? But yet they're finding ways to use the smart technology to enhance crop yields. And I mean, it was a pretty impressive combine we saw there.
Yeah, it's enhancing crop yields. You can run 30 combines at once from one iPad. You can keep track of soil moisture, all sorts of different data you can collect while your machines are out there running, which means you get more yield. So.
Yeah. Along the way, we also ran into a friend of Stansberry Research, Whitney Tilson. Take a look. Hi, Jared Kelly here again at CES. I'm with Whitney Tilson. We're standing in front of the Samsung booth. Whitney, you had an interesting experience, I guess, let's see, it's January, so about 3 months ago at our conference. You gave a presentation about inflection points and how they're pivotal relating to earnings in particular for companies. And you have a kind of a story about Samsung as well. You want to share that?
Yeah, being here at the Samsung booth at CES reminds me of 5 years ago or so. I got into the stock. Samsung is a great company, market leader across everything from refrigerators to semiconductors to smartphone screens, etc. And it was probably the cheapest global big cap company in the world. Net of cash was trading at about 3 times earnings. And so I figured, wow, that's so cheap, and I just bought the stock.
Yeah, you can't go wrong.
And I didn't lose money, but it sort of turned into a value trap. There are two kinds of value traps, the one where you lose a lot of money, the one where you just don't make any money. It just sat there. And so for a couple years, it just sat there, and I got fatigued, and I sold, and not too long afterward, the stock doubled. And it wasn't a huge mistake, but the mistake I made is that I forgot what I talked about at the conference, which is stocks follow earnings. It's not enough that the stock is just cheap. There's got to be something that causes it to revalue. Ideally, in most cases, earnings going up a lot. And so it turns out I was right that there was going to be an inflection point with Samsung. What ended up happening is the semiconductor cycle turned, Samsung's earnings doubled, and the stock doubled. But that didn't happen for a few years. And so in hindsight, I should have been more aware of, I shouldn't have gotten into the stock until I had conviction that the earnings were really going to move. And so it's a good lesson. I've matured, I've developed as a value investor from just buying stuff because it's cheap. Well, that's not good enough. What you want is to buy something that's cheap and where there's an inflection point on earnings that's going to move the stock.
But Samsung's still one of the cheapest big cap stocks out there, right?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is the semiconductor cycle has started to turn. There are a lot of people out there who think it's going way back down, and it's been a terribly cyclical industry over time. There's some thinking that maybe it won't be so cyclical going forward. The industry is consolidated. Samsung's the market leader. So Samsung stock has pulled back quite a bit. It's not quite as cheap as it was back then. Maybe it's, 5 times earnings net of cash. So still super cheap. But in order to get into it today, you've got to believe that that earnings in general, probably driven by the semiconductor cycle, is going to at least bottom and start to turn around, and that will in turn drive the stock.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot for sharing. All right. That's going to do it for us here at CES. Now we've got a lot of work to go back and vet a lot of these companies and kind of dig into what are the technologies that we're really excited about, what their market potential is, and how the companies that are going to benefit the most from these things. So we have some exciting projects that we're building as part of this. And in fact, starting tomorrow, we're going to be unveiling the details of a product that can really help investors make a lot of money on what we saw here at CES. So I'm excited about that. So make sure you stay tuned for tomorrow, and you'll take a look at your inbox, and we'll be sending you details on that. Again, thank you for joining us, and on behalf of everybody at Stansberry here from CES, thanks for watching.